I took my parents and two kids to a five-star restaurant on our first date and asked him to pay, but he said he'd only pay for me and not for the ones I brought with me. Now, true gentlemen no longer exist. When I met Liam on that app, I felt I had finally found someone who could be on my level. I mean someone who was not afraid of responsibility or serious commitments. He was an engineer with a good salary and the profile of a formal man. I was tired of casual dating and those immature guys who only want to pay $2 for a stale coffee. I knew my worth, and my time and presence deserved a significant investment. This first dinner was not going to be a simple meeting to see if there was chemistry. It was going to be a test, a rigorous evaluation of his character and his potential as a provider. It's the only way to screen out the fakes quickly. If you can't handle a dinner, how do you expect to handle a family and a life together? My decision to bring my entire entourage, my two children, Leo and Sophia, and my parents, Ricardo and Elena, was not impulsive. It was a strategic move. I don't understand why people see it as a mistake. A woman who is a mother and has an extended family brings a complete package. And if a man gets scared of reality, it's better to find out at the restaurant entrance than 6 months later. Besides, my parents are excellent judges of character. I needed objective eyes, and the presence of my children demonstrated my seriousness. I had told Liam that the restaurant was 5-star, that we would meet there at 8. If he had been a true gentleman, he would have asked, "Is there anyone else you want to bring?" His silence was, in my eyes, a tacit consent that he was willing to receive me and mine. I chose Le Coton Noir, a notoriously expensive place, not for show, but because stress tests must be extreme to be reliable. Liam was not late, which was a point in his favor, but when he saw the 7 of us waiting at the entrance, my children were already a bit restless and my parents had already started making comments about the decor. I noticed a slight change in his expression, a blink that I could have interpreted as surprise, but which I decided to read as admiration. "Wow, Clara, you hadn't told me we'd have such a big table," he stammered, his face slightly pale. I smiled because my smile was my armor. I replied that it was a special occasion and that we were all excited to meet him. My parents introduced themselves formally and my children immediately sat down at the table, eagerly looking at the dessert menu. The dinner began and I, in my role as hostess, took control. I ordered without hesitation, selecting the most emblematic and expensive dishes. For me, the duck confit and the best red wine on the menu. For my parents, the lobster and a chablis. For the children, although they wanted pasta, I insisted they try the smaller filet mignon, because children need to learn to appreciate quality. I noticed that Liam had remained silent after ordering a simple grilled chicken and mineral water, but I mentally excused him. Maybe he was nervous, or maybe he was a man of modest habits, which was not a problem as long as he was willing to finance the lifestyle I deserved. He made no objections to what was ordered, he just took note. And how could he object? It would be an unforgivable act of stinginess. My father, Ricardo, at one point, asked him some sharp questions about his retirement plan and his assets, which, I admit, was a bit uncomfortable, but absolutely necessary. Liam responded in monosyllables, looking more at his bread than at my father. This was my first red flag, but I immediately downplayed it. He was emotionally distant, yes, but that meant he was stable and predictable. What he saw as an intimidating dinner, I saw as confirmation that I was not settling for less. The atmosphere warmed up a bit when my mother mentioned that my children had expensive tuition at a private school. Liam just nodded with that look of his that I now know was panic, but which at the time I thought was deep concentration. I was floating in self-satisfaction. The food was exquisite, the children were being relatively quiet, and my parents were, at least, entertained. He was about to pass the test, and I was the great strategist who had designed the exam. We were talking about vacation plans, I suggesting the Maldives, when the waiter approached with that small black leather folder, the bearer of destiny, the bill, a sacred scroll. In that instant, the entire restaurant blurred. I knew exactly how much it was because I had been mentally adding it up, more than $1,200, a considerable sum, but perfectly manageable for a man of his caliber. I kept my hand firmly in my lap, waiting for the confirmation of his gentlemanliness. Liam took the folder, stared at it, and that was the moment, that unnecessary delay, that should have warned me that something horrible, something truly unacceptable, was about to happen. He frowned with an almost comical intensity. I told him with the soft but firm voice a woman should use to guide a man, "Don't worry, darling, take your time. I know it's a lot, but it's an excellent investment." I was giving him the opportunity to be the hero of the night, to show that, despite the surprise, he was a man of his word. I was sure he would do the right thing, that he would honor the invitation he had made to me. The idea that this was not just my dinner, but the dinner of my entire family, was a minor detail, a technicality that a true gentleman would overlook. I had simply facilitated the atmosphere. The black leather folder seemed to vibrate with negative energy. Liam, my supposed high-flying engineer, slid out the receipt, looked at it once more, then looked at me, and then at the row of 5 people accompanying me. There was a drop of sweat on his temple. It was a moment of silence so dense that even the waiters seemed to stop moving. He cleared his throat and, from the way he did it, I knew he was going to say something deeply inappropriate. My instinct screamed at me, "Don't ruin this. Be a man." What came out of his mouth was worse than an insult. It was a total abdication of his responsibility. "Clara," he said, his voice low and tense. "I understand this was a surprise." I interrupted him immediately before he could contaminate the atmosphere with his stinginess. "Liam, please don't start with that. We're talking about $285. It's a sum, but you invited me to dinner." He took a deep breath, which I considered a sign of unnecessary resistance. "Yes, I invited you to dinner. I didn't invite your 2 children or your parents, or an extra lobster for them. I'm not sure why you thought bringing a table of 7 without consulting me was appropriate for a first date." His comment offended me to my core. Appropriate? I was the woman who was considering giving him a chance, and he was questioning me, the star of the evening. I responded with the dignity of a queen. I told him in a clear voice, so my parents could hear, that his reaction was totally disproportionate. "Liam, the one who invites pays. It's basic manners. Or did you expect me to separate it from my bill as if they were a burden? This is my family. If you want to enter my life, you have to accept the complete package." My father, who had been quite quiet, suddenly leaned in and muttered something about investment protocol, which I thought was an excellent way to put pressure on him. But Liam did not bend. His face had hardened in a way that I found terribly cruel. He said yes, he would pay my share, my duck, my wine, and perhaps the appetizer, but that the rest, the uninvited, the extras, was my responsibility. "The children are yours, your parents are your parents. I did not summon them to this meeting," he snapped. This was the betrayal. At that moment I understood that I was not dealing with a man, but with a miserable accountant in an expensive suit. He had refused to honor the test of generosity that I had so carefully prepared. His refusal was a clear indication that he did not value me enough to take on an extra cost, even if it was a test of his integrity. I felt a surge of righteous anger. My voice rose a tone. "Are you causing a ridiculous scene over $100 per person? What kind of message are you sending to my children? That their mother dates cheapskates, that money is more important than decency." I had cornered him morally, I thought. The restaurant was beginning to notice us, which was embarrassing, but the fault was entirely Liam's for his childish resistance. The tension was palpable. He took out his wallet, a slow, deliberate movement, and put a wad of bills on the table. They were not nearly enough to cover the total, but he told me, "Here is your part, Clara. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to pay for the dinner of 5 people you brought as an ambush." At that moment, my parents were petrified and my children, who had finally sensed the drama, stopped picking at their desserts. The humiliation was burning. I was forced, by Liam's own clumsiness, to take out my own credit card. I swiped it angrily, feeling the weight of the bill and the eyes of everyone in the room. The waiter, an expressionless young man, processed the payment while Liam stood up without saying goodbye. He looked at me one last time with an expression he intended to be pity, but which I recognized as the cowardice of someone who cannot handle expectations. He left, leaving the seven of us with the remains of a very expensive dinner and the absolute certainty that chivalry, that much-needed virtue, had been murdered by modern meanness. My only consolation was that I had done the right thing by exposing him. The exit from the restaurant was a logistical and emotional disaster that only Lean's brutal greed could have orchestrated. I had to explain to my parents, in a tone that tried to be calm but grated with indignation, that the supposed gentleman had revealed himself to be an opportunist. They reproached me in a low voice in the car, that perhaps the dinner had been a bit excessive, and that the timing of the family introduction had been questionable. Questionable? As if I were the guilty one for wanting to optimize the partner selection process? My mother even suggested, with that passive and condescending voice I hate so much, that maybe you should have told him, dear. That minimization of my effort and my humiliation infuriated me even more. My own family refused to recognize the gravity of Liam's offense. The point of no return was not when I paid the bill, but when I got home and replayed the night, I realized my self-esteem was at stake. I had to justify the expense and the shame, not only to myself but to my circle. If I was the one who paid, then Liam had to be transformed into a villain of epic proportions. It wasn't that I was impulsive or selfish, it was that he had been a misogynist of the worst kind, using the promise of a date to set a trap and humiliate a working mother and her family. My indignation grew, fueled by the wine and the injustice of having $1,300 less in my bank account. I decided that the only way to restore my honor was to tell the story, but with the necessary filters. My justification was based on the irrefutable premise that any man who invites implicitly knows that the woman has the right to bring company, especially if that woman is a mother. The problem was not the surprise, the problem was his refusal to pay. That showed a lack of character, a poverty of spirit that could not be tolerated. I convinced myself that if I had been in his place, with that amount of money, I would have done it with a radiant smile. The fact that he did not confirmed that he was the problem, the moral failure of the night. The following days were a whirlwind of rationalization. I refused to take calls from my best friend, Sarah, because I knew she would have the rational perspective I hated so much. I needed to immerse myself in my own truth. I began to rewrite the story in my head, emphasizing how Liam had been cold from the beginning, how he had avoided making eye contact, and how he had muttered about the price of the dishes even before they arrived at the table. These small details, though perhaps magnified by selective memory, served to build my case that he was planning to sabotage the date from the start. The fact that I brought 6 extra people was just the excuse he was looking for to confirm his latent stinginess. My rage led me to action. I could not let this man get away with it, walking around with the belief that he could humiliate women. I opened Reddit, that wonderful platform where people are brutally honest, and began to type my confession. I needed thousands of strangers to validate my feelings. As I wrote, each sentence became a just crusade. I was not asking for sympathy. I was demanding justice and recognition that I had been the victim of a conspiracy of meanness. Even the description of the scene in the restaurant was carefully edited. He had become aggressive. I had maintained a stoic calm, and the waiter had looked at me with compassion, not with the silent judgment I really felt. In my inner monologue, there was a fleeting moment, as I reread the bill before throwing it in the trash, when the voice of logic tried to sneak in. Wasn't it obvious that bringing your parents and children to a first date, to a place of that nature, was manipulation? I crushed it immediately. That was the misogynistic thinking that society instills in us so that women are weak. No, this was not manipulation. This was audacity. This was demanding respect. The problem was not my action. The problem was the disproportionate reaction of a man who simply was not up to par. The post was ready for the world, a beacon of the injustice that women must face daily in the search for a decent man. The inevitable collapse came with the publication of my story online. I had anticipated waves of support, women validating my point of view, men admitting that the host's responsibility is total. Instead, I received a digital slap of epic proportions. The comments poured in, and they were not the words of comfort or validation I expected, but cold, analytical accusations about my selfishness and my absolute lack of common sense. They called me irresponsible, a gold digger, and the most hurtful phrase of all, the only person who ambushed you was yourself. I sat in front of the screen, feeling my rage solidify into an icy indignation. I remember reading a comment that said with clinical cruelty, "Clara, the problem is not that he doesn't want to pay $1,300. The problem is that you delude yourself into thinking you have the right to use a stranger's wallet to impress your family." Impress my family? How absurd. I was not trying to impress them, I was trying to evaluate a man. His analysis was totally wrong, but what hurt me was the massive support that point of view had. Suddenly, I was not the indignant avenger, but the villain of the story. This only proved my original point. The world conspires against women who have high standards and who demand to be treated as a priority. In the midst of this digital chaos, my father called me. His tone was severe, something unusual for him. "Clara, your mother and I have been talking. What you did was not right. You put us in a very uncomfortable situation." I tried to reverse the script immediately. Uncomfortable because of Liam, Dad? He made us look ridiculous. But he didn't listen to me. He told me he had been looking at my account and that, while he didn't want to be part of the drama, he felt that he and Mom should contribute their share of the bill, about $300. But he said it with such an air of obligation, as if they were paying to clean up the shame, not to help me. I refused the money. I told him that if they were going to pay, they should do it out of moral conviction that Liam had been a jerk, not out of charity. My father hung up, annoyed. My mind worked 1,000 miles an hour to build the final justification. I sat down to write a response to the commenters, but deleted it several times. I wanted to scream at them that they didn't understand the context, that men must make sacrifices to prove their worth, and that I was just following the unwritten rules of courtship. Instead, I focused on the fact that Liam had left without even offering an apology. This, for me, was irrefutable proof of his wickedness. A decent man, even if he disagreed, would have covered the bill and then had the decency to confront me in private. By abandoning the battlefield, he had admitted his guilt and his cowardice. The most painful part of the confrontation was not the loss of money or the public humiliation, but the feeling that my effort had been in vain. I had exposed myself, I had tested the system, and the system had rejected me. I began to interpret everything, the wine, the luxurious restaurant, the presence of my family, as a sacrifice I had made for him. I had created the perfect stage for him to shine, and he, out of his meanness, had ruined it. The blame could never be mine. I had only been the facilitator of a greater truth, the scarcity of real men. The collapse of my plan did not leave me in ruins, but in a state of deep moral disappointment. I found myself in the ruins and retrospective justification. The real problem, I told myself, was not bringing the family without notice. The problem was that the confrontation became public. People, especially on the internet, only see the headline, the surface, and not the abyss of emotional abandonment that has led me to this point. If Liam had paid without a fuss, if he had behaved like a gentleman, none of this controversy would exist. The real problem is not my action, but Liam's lack of decorum and selfishness in not understanding that a restaurant bill is a litmus test, not a utility bill. The justification I solidified was the idea that Liam had not valued the emotional investment I made, the stress of organizing my children, convincing my parents to come, choosing the perfect outfit. All of that was emotional capital that he should have reciprocated with financial capital. When he said he would only pay my share, what he was really saying was, I only value the part of you that I consume, not your whole life. It was a rejection of my motherhood, my family ties, and, by extension, my value as a woman. Those $1,300 were the price of my dignity, and he had refused to pay it. I sat down to meditate on the night. I remembered how Liam had spent so much time talking about his work, his projects, and his downtown apartment. He was the picture of stability, but without generosity, stability is just a golden cage. I reinterpreted his emotional distance not as maturity, but as calculating coldness. He was measuring my value in terms of cost-benefit, and that is what enrages me. My own mother called me again, apologizing for my father's attitude, but insisting that it was better for me to learn my lesson. Learn the lesson of what? That kindness and generosity have become extinct? My response was blunt. The only lesson I learned was that people are petty and are willing to blame the victim. I decided that the only way to purge the humiliation was to insist that Lean's mistake be recognized. I was the martyr. I had sacrificed my peace of mind and my money to expose a fraud. The money I paid was now a tax on male stupidity. The people on Reddit were simply a reflection of a society that is comfortable with mediocrity and a lack of standards. I began to frame my story as an act of public service. I had warned other women. I had risked my reputation so that they would know that, even in 2024, a man will leave you stranded if the price is too high. My firm and unwavering conclusion is that Liam is the epitome of decadence. He had the opportunity to rise up, to be the man he promised to be, and he reduced himself to an accountant. And now Clara, the one who dared to dream of a man who was not afraid of investment, am the one being punished. I do not regret bringing my family. I regret investing so much time and energy in a man who did not understand the fundamental principle. If you want a jewel, you have to be willing to pay the full price without asking for a discount on the settings. And if people on the internet think I'm the bad guy, so be it. Their judgment is only proof that they're as blind as Liam. They need to wake up. Popular Reddit comments on the main story. Anonymous User 1. It's amazing how the protagonist manages to rationalize a financial ambush of this magnitude. Not only did you bring 5 uninvited people to a first date, but you chose the most expensive restaurant in the area and ordered the most expensive dishes. This was not a test of chivalry, it was a blatant attempt at social extortion. A gentleman pays for his guest, not for the guests she imposes herself. Your outrage is directly proportional to your sense of entitlement. Blaming Lean for causing a scene when he refused to be manipulated into paying a bill that far exceeded any reasonable expectation is the height of self-justification. He is not the cheapskate, you are the irresponsible one, and what you are calling betrayal is simply a stable man who knows how to set healthy financial boundaries in the face of obvious manipulation. OP's response: your comment is the perfect manual of modern economic machismo. Do you think a high-level man should be applauded for his stability while hiding from the most basic responsibilities? I didn't impose anything. The life of a mother and a woman with strong ties is a package. He invited me into my world. If I had brought my secretary or a friend, would you justify it too? Of course not. The problem is my family, because that implies real commitment. Liam ran from responsibility, and the only extortion that occurred was emotional, where he tried to make me feel guilty for having standards. And by the way, the money wasn't the problem, it was decency. $1,300 is a trifle for someone who earns what he earns. Stop blaming women for being ambitious. Anonymous User 2. I have to ask what you expected your parents and children to do during the confrontation. You used them as props for your social experiment. The fact that you refused your father's offer to pay a share just to maintain the narrative that you are the martyr who sacrificed her money is frankly revealing. You are not outraged by the lack of chivalry, you are outraged because your plan failed. A man who is faced with a $1,300 bill on a first date without prior notice has every right to refuse. Your vision of chivalry is outdated and is based on the principle that men exist to serve your financial expectations. Have you considered that the only person who behaved immaturely and who caused the embarrassment was you? OP's response: my parents were not props, they were my support system and my advisors, and their offer to pay was an insult. They were trying to pay for the shame that Liam had inflicted on us, not for their own food. I told them clearly that if they wanted to support the cause, they should do so by condemning Liam's act, not by trying to compensate for his misery. And I'm not outraged because my plan failed, I'm outraged by the fundamental lack of respect. If he had wanted to go to a cheaper place, he would have suggested it at the beginning, but he accepted the scenario I proposed and then humiliated me. People like you encourage mediocrity by making women settle for less. Anonymous User 3. The most worrying thing about this post is the total absence of empathy or self-awareness. You described the situation in detail, admitting the excessive spending, the lack of communication, and the use of your family to test a stranger. And yet, your conclusion is that gentlemen no longer exist. Was Liam supposed to read your mind? Was he supposed to assume that a first date at a luxury restaurant meant paying for 7 people? What you see as a litmus test, normal people see as a giant red flag of manipulation and irrational expectations. Please reflect, even minimally, on the damage this did to your own family by exposing them to that spectacle. OP's response: it's not about reading minds, it's about understanding the social context. The man sets the tone. If a man invites a woman to a luxury dinner, he should be prepared for any reasonable eventuality. And the only giant red flag was his inability to absorb an expense that did not affect him at all. What hurts me is that you, the commenters, are defending meanness. He caused the scene when he got up without paying. I maintained my composure and my dignity by taking out my card. And as for my children and my parents, they are strong enough to see reality. The world is full of men who promise a lot and deliver little. It's time someone said it. Update 1. The response to my post was worse than I ever imagined. I expected the support of the female community, but what I got was a barrage of criticism that only showed how deeply misogynistic thinking is embedded, even among women themselves. And don't even get me started on the men. To say I'm a gold digger is an atrocious insult. I don't need his money. I need his willingness to spend it. People don't understand the difference. Money is the currency, but generosity is the proof of intention. Their comments, so full of judgment, gave me the strength to take more direct measures, because if the world had already condemned me, at least I would make sure that the real culprits suffered the consequences. My first move, obviously, was to contact Liam. I was not going to stoop to a ridiculous apology. My intention was to ask for a reimbursement of the part that he legally and morally should have covered, not the $1,300, but perhaps half, as compensation for the emotional damage and humiliation he inflicted on me. I sent him a formal, precisely worded text message where I explained that although I understood his slight discomfort, his reaction was unacceptable and that I expected him to do the right thing and compensate me. He did not respond. I tried to call 3 times that night. The next day, my number was blocked and on social media I could no longer see his profile. Coward. A man of value faces the consequences. He chose to hide behind a screen, proving that my assessment of his character, although belated, was correct. A puppet. The next confrontation came from my own home, and it hurt more than I wanted to admit. My parents, already upset by the spectacle, summoned me to the living room. My mother, Elena, with her usually calm face, looked at me with disapproval. They told me they had read my post. Apparently, my Aunt Juana had seen it and had sent it to them, another family betrayal, and that they were deeply ashamed. My father, Ricardo, insisted again that he would give me $300, but this time with a condition, that I stop blaming Liam publicly. He said I was damaging our family's reputation and that there are ways of doing things. I yelled at them. Yes, I yelled at them, asking them how they could be so lukewarm. I told them I would not accept a cent if it came with a moral gag. Liam's money, the money of injustice, cannot be washed away with family charity. I felt completely alone, betrayed by my date, ridiculed by the anonymous mass of the internet, and abandoned by my own parents. This loneliness fueled my indignant justice. I decided that if Liam did not pay the financial cost, he would at least pay the reputational cost, and I don't mean on social media, but in his real life. I started to investigate. The first thing I did was go after the restaurant, which was an accomplice to the humiliation due to its oppressive atmosphere and exorbitant prices. I left a 1-star review on Google, blaming them for the tension generated and the lack of professionalism in not mediating the conflict. I suggested that the service was terrible, even though the food was good, because the atmosphere was toxic and ruined the experience. Then I focused on Liam, the real target. I went on LinkedIn, found his immaculate corporate profile with the name of his engineering company clearly visible. The idea of exposing him there, of sending a message to his boss about the kind of person he was, about his financial instability and his lack of ethics in dating, gave me a shiver of satisfaction. I was about to write an email to Human Resources, arguing that a man who cannot manage the finances of a dinner cannot manage multi-million-dollar projects. For a moment, a tiny voice warned me that this was crossing a line, that it was harassment, but I crushed it. My duty was to protect the next victim. It was my public service to clean up the dating market of these kinds of opportunists. The fact that the Reddit commenters called me selfish only reinforced my belief that I was the only person seeing the truth. My frustration is legitimate, my money is gone, my time was wasted, and my family was exposed to a fiasco. All because a man was unable to live up to my standards. My self-justification became my mantra. I'm not the bad guy. I am simply a woman of value who demands that promises, even implicit ones, be kept. Liam and the Reddit community are trying to manipulate the truth to make me feel bad for demanding the respect I deserve. But they will not succeed. I am the martyr of high expectations. Popular comments from Reddit about the update. 1. Anonymous user 4. Clara. Your attempt to harass this man after being rejected is an act of revenge that borders on criminal. Blocking you is the most reasonable action Liam could have taken, and your justification for contacting his boss, arguing that his inability to pay for an ambush dinner of $1,300 is a sign of job instability, is absolutely delusional. You are not a martyr of high expectations. You are a spiteful person who is trying to sabotage someone's professional life because he did not pay for a show that you orchestrated yourself. Stop projecting your own irresponsibility. The one-star review of the restaurant is simply pathetic and proves that you blame everyone except yourself for your decisions. OP's response. Calling it harassment is a ridiculous exaggeration. It is exposing the truth. Do you think that financial ethics and personal life are disconnected from work ethics? Of course not. A man who lies by omission about his generosity on a date lies in his reports. My duty is to warn, and as for the restaurant, yes, they are accomplices. They should have asked why there were 7 people if only 2 had been reserved for. They did not intervene. They allowed the tension to grow, and therefore, they are partially responsible for the bad experience. You only see the action, not the moral principle. Anonymous user 5. The part about the confrontation with your parents is key. The fact that you refused the $300 because it did not come with the moral condemnation of Liam shows that your motivation is not financial, but purely vengeful and for validation. You are willing to sacrifice family support and remain in debt just to maintain your narrative of an immaculate victim. Your parents are the real heroes here, trying to minimize the damage you have caused. People don't call you selfish for no reason. Your actions after the date, especially the attempt to interfere with Liam's employment, confirm your manipulative and dangerous character. You need professional help to deal with this level of self-deception. OP's response. What an insult. I did not refuse the money out of revenge. I refused it because the money was poisoned by cowardice. I don't need my parents' charity to pay for Liam's meanness. My parents should have defended me, not tried to silence my just indignation. They fear confrontation and Aunt Juana's gossip, which is pathetic. I am not in debt. I am just defending my right to date men who are not miserable, and the attempt to interfere with his work is a professional warning, a necessary measure to protect the community. Anonymous user 6. You have failed on 2 key points of your martyr crusade. 1. No one on the internet supports you, and 2. Your own family is ashamed and asks you to stop. If the entire universe is telling you that you acted badly, is there not even a microsecond of doubt in your mind that you are the source of the crisis? Your fixation on Liam's generosity hides a deep insecurity about your own value without monetary validation. You are using chivalry as an excuse for exploitation. I hope you do not send that email to his work, as that would cause you serious legal problems. OP's response. It's not the entire universe, it's an echo chamber of online misogynists and a family that fears gossip. And no, I have no doubts. The only crisis is moral. Insecurity about my value? My value is incalculable, and that is why I demand to be treated with the dignity I deserve. A man who does not want to pay a restaurant bill is a man who does not value a woman. It's simple. And about the email, we'll see. The law is made to protect the guilty. Justice for the victims. Final update. The escalation reached its climax in the most humiliating way imaginable. And, of course, it was not my fault, but because of Liam's calculated meanness and the stupidity of the people in my city. After blocking me everywhere, Liam did not stay still. Since he could not attack my reputation directly, he attacked indirectly, using the resource of honesty and transparency, the favorite weapon of the passive-aggressive. I found out from a friend that Liam had published a detailed story on a local social network, a thread that went viral about the importance of honesty in dating, specifically mentioning that some people believe they can use a first date to pay for a family dinner at a very expensive restaurant without prior notice. The worst part is that he attached an edited screenshot of the credit card receipt, anonymizing my name, but with the numbers blurred, and compared it to a photo of the table of 7 that someone from the restaurant must have taken. Another betrayal. He did not name me, but the description was so vivid, talking about the lobster for the father-in-law and the duck confit for the client, that anyone who knew me or had read my original post would know it was me. This was not just a hint, it was a deliberate attempt to ruin me socially, to confirm my status as a martyr and resentful person that I was forced to assume because of his initial stinginess. The real disaster occurred when Aunt Juana, the official bearer of bad news, saw Liam's thread on Facebook and sent it to my parents. Their reaction was immediate and devastating. It was not a scream or an argument, it was a cold sentence of distancing. My mother called me and told me that although she understood I was hurt, the way I was dragging the family's name through the internet was unacceptable. She told me they felt used, that they had been manipulated for my litmus test, and that, even worse, their own image was now compromised in the community. My father intervened to tell me that they could no longer watch Leo and Sophia in the afternoons because they needed a break from the tension and time to reflect. The blow of losing my parents' support, the free babysitter, and the emotional anchor they represented was brutal. Suddenly, reality hit me. I had no one. My children were confused by their grandparents' coldness, and I found myself navigating the sea of daily logistics completely alone. It was a direct and undeniable consequence of my actions, of the confrontation in the restaurant, and of my subsequent attempt at revenge. I felt for a fleeting and painful second the weight of guilt. If only you had told Liam, if only you had paid for the dinner yourself and laughed about the situation. But no, the resentful martyr refused to yield. I quickly reorganized my thoughts. My parents were not punishing me for my manipulation, they were punishing me for their own social cowardice. They were more worried about Aunt Juana's gossip than about their own daughter's dignity. And Liam, he was nothing more than a sociopath who enjoyed humiliating women to get social validation. My isolation was not a condemnation, but a purification. It was confirmation that I was too honest for the hypocritical people around me. So here I am, isolated with a $1,300 debt that now represents a noble sacrifice without the support of my parents who have proven to be as weak as Liam. My final conclusion is bitter but firm. Men like Liam use the concept of healthy boundaries and honesty as an excuse to be petty and shy away from investment. And women who demand excellence are punished with isolation. Liam won the social media battle, but I won the moral war. He will have money, but I will have the truth. And the truth is that chivalry is not dead. It was murdered by cheapskates. And I will not apologize for demanding what I deserve. Popular Reddit comments on the final update. Anonymous User 7. Congratulations, Clara. You achieved exactly what the comments warned you about. You dynamited your personal and family life for the simple need to be right. Liam did not humiliate you. You did it to yourself when you became the viral topic of local social media. The fact that your own parents, whom you used as human shields on the date, decide to distance themselves is not proof of their cowardice, but that they are exhausted by your chronic selfishness. You are alone because your actions have consequences, and your last line, "Chivalry is not dead, it was murdered by cheapskates," is the perfect epitaph of your lack of introspection. You are your own executioner. OP's response. Your cynicism is palpable. I dynamited my life? No, I purified it. If my family prefers to align with a cowardly stranger than with their own daughter, then that relationship has been broken for a long time. I did not drag them. They chose the side of meanness for fear of gossip. And yes, Liam humiliated me. By posting the bill and exposing the situation, he confirmed that his goal was not a date, but to demonstrate financial superiority. I am my own executioner, yes, because I refuse to surrender to the low standards that you preach. Anonymous User 8. The plot twist is the distancing of your parents, which is the most logical and sad consequence of this whole saga. In your narrative, you are still the victim, but the reality is that the damage you did to them by using them for your test and then exposing them to viral humiliation is irreparable. The fact that you reject even this loss of support and continue to justify it as a purification is the strongest indicator that you have opted for total delusion. I hope your children do not adopt this same life philosophy based on manipulation and resentment. OP's response. My children are intelligent and will learn the truth that people will fail you, even your own family, when it comes to confronting authority, especially the authority of a wealthy man. My parents are ashamed that I have the audacity to fight for my rights, not of my selfishness. And it is not delusion, it is moral resistance. I am the lighthouse, and yes, sometimes lighthouses are alone in the dark. I am fine. Anonymous User 9. I find it revealing that even when facing the loss of your support network, you still do not see the causal connection between your actions and their consequences. Instead of apologizing to your parents for using them, you degrade them by calling them cowards. This is the pattern of behavior that repels people. Liam is not to blame for your isolation. Your inability to accept reality is. You demanded respect, but offered none in return, neither to your date, nor to your parents, nor to the community. I hope this loneliness gives you the time for genuine introspection, although I very much doubt that will happen. OP's response. Genuine introspection? I have had it, and my conclusion is that I was right. If my parents prefer superficial peace to their daughter's justice, then the relationship had to be distanced. Loneliness is not my punishment, it is my armor. It protects me from mediocrity. And as for Liam, he is a perfect example of why women should not give in. His stinginess was the trigger and the final point.